Hey everyone, welcome to Preface Nomad Junior. I am Sal. Today we're going to learn how we can reduce repetitive code in our app. For that, we're going to make an app called Escape the Airport. We have a bird over here and there's a plane. So if the bird collides with the plane, the game stops and it shows us the final score, and then we can restart the game. So let's get into App Inventor, start making it. Okay, so let's start with the designer first. I will start with the designer 90% done. As you can see that I have a canvas and some image sprites over here, and I have my media files in the project. You can pause the video and try to replicate the designer and file your own pictures first. Don't worry, you've learned all these concepts and components before. I believe you can do this. If you really want this to start with this copy, feel free to contact us. We'll be more than happy to send you the copy and the revision materials. Okay, so ready? Let's start. So one thing to notice is that when you go to screen 1, you have to set the screen orientation to landscape. Because if you remember in the intro video, I showed you that the phone has to be landscape in this app. The second thing that I want to note is that the score clock, which will set the score every 100 milliseconds, we want to set the timer interval to 100 milliseconds so that it fires after every 100 millisecond, and we can add 1 to the score. With that, the designer is done. Let's go to the blocks part. As you can see, I already have some blocks over here. So what these do is that whenever the app launches, it just makes the bird to move to the left and in the middle of the screen, and it makes the plane come from the right and from a random Y. And what this does is that it's setting the speed of the plane to 50 and it's heading to 180, which will make it head left with a speed of 50. With this, let's see how we can move the bird. So let's have the birds.drag method over here. So what we want to do is whenever the bird is moved, we want to set its X to whatever it's been moved, which is the current X, and we want to set its Y to wherever it's been moved, which is the current Y. So we'll have its dot move to the current X. Oops. To have it to the current X to the current Y. So that wherever you move the bird, it will move there. And now the next thing where we want to do is code for the plane. So what happens is at the start of the game, the plane spawns from the right and moves to the left of the screen. So we have the method for this one that for it to spawn, that it spawns from the right, which is denoted by the X, and we want it to spawn from a random vertical position, which will be given by the Y. And we want to do the same thing whenever it reaches this edge of the screen. So we'll do the same thing whenever the plane reaches the edge. One thing I want you to notice is that whenever the plane reaches an edge, the only edge that it's going to reach is the left edge, because the plane always starts from the right edge and moves to the left edge. It's never going to touch this edge or this edge, so we don't need to check wherever which edge it's touching. It's always going to be the left one, because the plane is moving from the right to the left. Okay, with that, we'll move the plane back to over here. Now, if you see that we actually have to do the same thing whenever it reaches this edge. So let's delete this and just duplicate this part. Now, if you notice that we're actually doing the same thing when the game is started, when the plane reaches the edge. So we're going to introduce a new concept called procedure. Which can help us write the code one time and help us execute the same code at different places in the app. So what we'll do is we'll make a procedure called plane reset, and we'll have the procedure to set over here. Let's name this plane reset because it makes sense to name it that. So whenever you call plane reset, the plane goes back over here, and you can call it multiple times from anywhere. So let's just duplicate this part because this is what plane reset will do. And what we'll do is we'll delete this part. We'll have this, and we'll actually just call plane reset. So calling plane reset does the same thing that we had coded over here. It's just that we have to write it once and we can call it anywhere, anytime with this one command. We'll delete this and call plane reset again over here, because these two are doing essentially the same thing. Okay, now so let's proceed to coding for the score. So from previous lessons, you know that we'll have a global variable called score so that we can call it from anywhere, and we'll name it score and set it to 0. And whenever the app starts, we want to set global score to 0. And at that time, we also want to set the score label, its text to, we want to join, because we want to have the label score over here, and with that we want to have the score, actual score that we have over here. So we'll have to join the strings. So we place this over here. We'll have the text score, and we'll get the score over here. And for increasing of the score, you notice that the score keeps increasing as soon as the game starts. So for that, what we can do is, you can imagine we have included a clock component over here. So after every 100 milliseconds, this clock component will fire, and at that time we want to increase the score by 1. So as after every 100 milliseconds, it adds to the score 1, and we later code for that for our final score, which will stop whenever the bird collides with the plane. So whenever score clock timer, we'll set the global score to set global score to get global score, and we'll have it 2 plus 1. So we'll add this over here, move this over here, and we'll have 1. So this increases the score by 1, and we want to set the score label, so we'll just duplicate this part. We want to set it again to score, add the score to 1 and show the text of the score over here. For that, we call this method. Okay, so with that, we'll see how our app looks. So as you can see, the plane keeps on moving from the right to the left, and the score keeps increasing over here. So with that, let's code for our last most essential part, is that whenever the birds collide with the plane, so we'll have the set the score clock timer to be disabled, so that it stops counting the score at that time. So we'll have this to set to false. We'll have this set to false. We'll have the bird enabled to also set to false, because we don't want the bird to move. So whenever the user clicks on the bird and drags it, we don't want it to move. So we'll set this to false also, so that the bird also gets disabled. We want to set the plane's speed to 0, so that the plane stops moving. So we'll have this set to 0, so that the plane stops moving, and we'll show the final score of on the label at that time. So you know that the timer has stopped counting the score because this timer has been disabled, so the score will stop increasing. So we'll have the final score over here, and we'll get the global score. And at that time, we also want to set the restart button's visibility to be false. Oh, to be true. I'm so sorry. We want to set it to be true because the game has ended, and we want to be able to restart the game. But if you notice that we haven't set the restart button's visibility to be false whenever the game starts, because we want to only show restart button when we actually want to restart the game. So we have to have the restart button's visibility set to false when the game starts. So we'll add this over here. Now if you see that we're kind of doing the same things whenever the screen one starts and when we want to click the game, because essentially when we want to restart the game, we want to have this part to run again, as in the app has started again. So we can make a procedure for that, and we can call whenever the restart button is clicked, when you can call that procedure, so that we don't have to code this same again whenever the restart button gets clicked. So we'll just duplicate this part and we'll have it inside of a procedure, and we'll name this procedure as start. So we'll call this whenever we want to start the game, whether it's for the first time or we want to start it again. We'll place this inside of this, delete this part, and there we go. So over here, whenever the screen one is initialized, we actually want to call this method instead of calling this all over again. So we'll have screen1.initialize, and we'll call the procedure start inside of this. And the second place that we want to call this procedure is whenever the restart button gets clicked. At that time also we want to call this procedure start. Okay, so if you notice that when the game stops, we have set the bird IS to be disabled and the plane speed to be 0. And we have also set the score clock timer to be enabled, so the score will stop counting. So at this time, what we want to do is, so we want to add the part of setting the bird IS enabled to be true again when the game is restarted. So we place this over here. We'll have this to true. And we want to also set the timer enabled to be true. You see that when the app starts and it calls this start procedure, it's going to set the bird IS enabled to be true and set the score timer enabled to also be true. But if it does not matter, because if it's called again, even though whenever the app starts we have the bird is enabled at that time and also the score clock is enabled at that time, but if it was true and we change it back to true, that doesn't make any difference. So it does not matter if we actually have these two things over here. It will help us over here in the restart button so that we don't have to code it over here. That's how procedures help us. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's see how our app looks. So let's refresh this and we'll move the, we'll restart and we'll avoid the plane. We'll avoid the plane right now. Here we crash, so you see that here we have the restart button pop up and the score has stopped counting and shows that's the final score. So when we click on the restart, goes back to 0 and we can play the game again. Okay, so let's go over what we learned today. We learned about procedure and how we can use it to reduce repetitive code, as in if we are doing the same thing again and again at different places, we can bundle all of that up in a procedure and we can call it from different places so that we don't have to write the code over and over again. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please give us a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe.